All right. Thanks for hopping on, everybody. And we got some more people filing in here. But again, my name is Ryan Dosen, Director of Sales here at Host. Eric's not with us this week, but Chris is joining us. Chris is VP of Sales. He's going to be able to help answer any questions you guys have. Like usual, if you guys have any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat. And we'll do our best to get answers to you. You'll also have my contact information at the end. If you do have additional or follow-up questions, we'll be able to get answers back to you that way. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to your relationship manager. Before we get into merchant statements and all that, again, here at Host, your success as independent sales agents is our top priority. We're committed to providing exceptional support, dedicated guidance, fast responses, real solutions, both for you and for your merchants, so that you can build your portfolio and your merchants can have a great experience with us. Okay. We provide 24/7 US-based tech support. You guys have personal relationship managers that are there to make sure that everything is streamlined with your merchant approvals and that everything stays smooth sailing with your merchants. At Host, you have access to a fairly unmatched selection of payment technologies, physical devices from companies like Valor, Deja Vu, Ingenico, Swipe Simple, to name a few. Also, a ton of different payment gateways and software technologies, including the Cloud Manager software suite that we've talked at length about and had um, many webinars covering, as well as many new updated softwares, being released. Most recently, we released Cloud Donor, we released Cloud Booking, Cloud Time, and there's more coming. Cloud Events is right around the corner. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us today. And enjoyed partnering with you. And let's hop here into the trenches and talk a little bit about merchant statements. So again, what we're here about today is how to read a merchant statement, the things to look out for. This is a part of our Sales Trenches series, solution-based selling in the real world. A lot of you have been here for just about all of the videos in this series, which are all going to be available. This one's going to be available on YouTube probably in the next week or so. Our goal here is to provide you with real world knowledge, real world examples that's going to help you get out there, say the right things, pitch the right things, and win more business. All right. So being able to read a merchant statement is really important. But a lot of you, when we talk to you the first time, we tell you, okay, hey, it's all going to start with a merchant statement. The first thing you should always be trying to do is to get the merchant statement from your prospective merchants. The ability to read these statements and understand what the merchant is currently paying is maybe one of the most important skills that you can have for winning and losing a deal. Okay, 9 out of 10 merchants, they can't even explain their own statement. The statements are, I'll say, it seems pretty intentional how complicated a lot of the statements are, right? And so for someone that's not in the industry, and even for some of us that are in the industry, it can be challenging. It can just start to look like trying to scan the matrix or something like that, right? There's just tons of numbers and abbreviations all over the place. It's difficult to tell what are kind of the add-ons, what are the costs that should kind of just run with the deal no matter who I'm partnered with. Okay, so again, most merchants aren't going to be able to explain their own statement. Many agents out there can't, and our goal is for you, after your time with us today, to have a lot better skills in terms of being able to read, interpret, and then communicate to the merchant what's going on with their current statement, with their current payment processor, and how you can position them to be in a better spot, with Host. Okay, so again, an agent who can explain a merchant statement is going to be the one who's going to be able to win the account. They also have to be able to not just explain what line by line is, they have to be able to identify the key things that are going to be relevant for that business owner. Okay. And again, if you can hone your skills for reading these statements, this is something that can compound your residuals, because the better you can get at this, the faster you can get at this, the more timely your responses are going to be able to be, the more impactful your responses are going to be able to be. A lot of times there's a little window of time when you're able to win a deal or lose a deal, and they've got to tune out and go focus on something else. So you want to be able to move quickly on this. Now, a quick sidebar here. Many of you know this. We will your relationship manager here at Host will help you analyze a statement and price a deal. Okay. Many of you do reach out to us for that, and we are happy to be here and help you with it. But of course, it's going to be more effective if you can get a statement, review it, identify the key things, and tell the merchant right on the spot how they're getting jobbed, as opposed to, I've got your statement, thanks, I'll be in touch, after I go talk to my relationship manager at Host, right? So we want you to be able to identify things when you're out in the field. One thing we want to talk about here also is, kind of the effective rate. So sometimes, and you'll see when we're going through some of these examples today, there might be one rate that is quoted, but that's not what they're actually paying, right? And there's a lot of games that can be played by processors, for or that's going to enable them to, with some degree of transparency, communicate a certain rate, but then the rate is not the end of the discussion, right? The effective rate at the end of the day, where we take the total fees divided by the total volume, that's going to be really where we're going to be able to identify whether or not the merchant is in a good place. And especially, it can be really helpful if you're in the trenches, if you're in front of a merchant and they're going to tell you, well, my rate is this, and then you look at the statement and you're like, well, it's not, right? That's what was communicated to you, but there's that rate may be there, but at the end of the day, you're paying something else, and you're able to show them that can be an impactful moment. If you're seeing, if when you do that total fees divided by total volume, if you're seeing that they're paying more than 2.6% or something like that, that's a general indication that they're probably overpaying. And anything above 3%, that's probably going to be a layup in terms of you being able to win them over, on rate. And then, of course, here with Host, you're able to win them over with best-in-class customer service and support as well. Cutting edge tech, all that. All right. So, the pricing models that you're typically going to see out there in the field. So we're going to do a quick overview of them, and then we're going to start looking at some of the different statements and what this all means. Okay, so one model is called tiered. Okay, oftentimes that's what they're going to do is they're going to break the different card transactions into one of three buckets, although you'll see an example here in a little bit where we've got an example with 4 tiers. Okay, but oftentimes the one you're going to see, you've got qualified, mid-qualified, and non-qualified. Okay, the processor in these cases, they're going to decide what kind of downgrades from qualified. So qualified is usually going to be the rate that they say, oh, this is what your rate's going to be, right? But then, oh, by the way, subtext, oh, by the way, if it's a mid-qualified transaction or non-qualified transaction, there's different rates there, but your rate is totally the qualified rate, right? But again, the quoted rate's not going to be their actual rate. Many times, almost always, a good chunk of the transactions are actually going to fall in those mid-qual, non-qual buckets, okay? And that's going to effectively downgrade things and wind up increasing the rate on those particular charges. Okay. Flat rate, one number for everything, looks simple, almost always the most expensive at any real volume. Okay. So, you're thinking your Squares and Stripes and QuickBooks and stuff like that. They charge a flat rate, again, especially to new business owners. I think this makes a lot of sense. A new business owner is like, well, I just want to know how much I'm going to pay, right? And maybe they're not even worried too much about percentages in the beginning because, if you're doing less volume in the very beginning when you're getting started, the percentages, they don't quite add up as much as they will when volume increases. Okay, so your Squares and Stripes, they make it simple, clear, transparent pricing, this flat rate, but the dirty little secret for them is that flat rate is well above, what it probably should be. Okay, it's at the high end of the spectrum of interchange rates. We'll talk a little bit more about interchange here in a second, and they're keeping a whole lot of gravy in there. Interchange plus. Okay, so this is the honest model. This is the one that's very transparent. It's the one that most people with Host wind up using. Interchange is the basic cost that has to get the cost of processing, which has to get paid back, to the card companies, and then a transparent markup, that's the markup that's being paid to host or the processor. Okay, we'll get into interchange in just a second. Then you also have different pricings where merchants are passing on the processing cost to the customer at the register. Okay, so here you're talking about dual pricing, surcharge, cash discount. We've talked in the past, we have past webinars. If you guys want to go back and take a look at them, we're not going to take a deep dive today on the differences between dual pricing, surcharge, and cash discount. Okay, but the gist is, if you're going to pay with cash, there's one price, and if you're going to pay with card, there's another price. Okay, there's a little bit of semantic difference in there. Dual pricing, they're actually going to display both. Hey, this is what you're going to pay if it's cash. Hey, this is what you're going to pay if it's card. All right. So where the money hides, okay? So, you're able to usually see, the effective rate very quickly. We told you how you're going to do that. And the fees section is where we're going to be looking and spending most of our time to find things like PCI fees, like regulatory fees, like network access fees. Okay. There's a lot of times stuff buried in the fee section. And I feel like it's intentionally buried in the fees section, in that long, long list of numbers, where you're going to find the little details that's going to help you identify where they're paying too much, where they're paying fluff fees, where maybe you're going to be able to help them save some money. All right, so I'm going to hop in now and we're going to get into the statements. All right, so first again, this first one is going to be an interchange plus statement. Okay, and again, just a little bit more about interchange plus. Okay, so interchange is the fee that flows from the merchant's acquiring bank to the cardholder's issuing bank on every transaction. It's set by the card brands Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex. It's published in rate tables, that are updated twice a year, I believe in April and October. Okay. Interchange, true interchange is a pass-through cost. Excuse me. Processor does not have control over it, right? Visa says this is what you owe us for these particular types of cards and transactions. Okay. Every processor is going to have to pay the same interchange on the same transaction. Okay. Why does this matter? Well, if interchange is identical for every processor, then everything above interchange is the part that the processor can compete on. Okay, that's basically the markup. So when a merchant compares two processors, the only honest comparison is the markup. Okay, basis points plus per transaction fees plus monthly fees. Okay, tiered hides this, flat rate hides this, interchange exposes it. Okay, and again, for like a key talking point, so like you can say something like every processor has to pay the same interchange to Visa. The only thing that changes is what the processor adds on top. That number is the markup, and that's what we should be comparing here, right? And so if you got an interchange plus statement, you're going to be able to very clearly see how you're going to be able to compare with it. Okay. One more thing I want to add, I mentioned basis points. Okay, so for those of you that are new to the industry or thinking about getting into the industry, a basis point is 1/100th of a percent. Okay, 1/100th of a percent. So 100 basis points is 1%. 25 basis points is 0.25%. Okay, so processors will quote markups in basis points because the numbers are sometimes smaller and easier to discuss, right? So like they might quote your rate is going to be interchange plus, 35 basis points and 10 cents per transaction. Okay. Said another way, that would be the markup is going to be 0.35% plus 10 cents per transaction. Okay. Why does this matter? So that's language that you're either familiar with, you and I are familiar with, or if you're new, you'll become familiar with. But to merchants, we may be speaking another language, right? When they hear basis points, they probably don't know what that means. But if you were to say about 1/3 of 1%, is added to the actual cost on top of the interchange. Okay, so a third of a percent, your typical merchant's going to be able to understand. Okay, so 35 basis points means about a third of a percent. For every $100 you process, that's 35 cents on top of what the actual card costs that you would be paying to host or to, the processor. All right. So let's take a look in here. Again, this is an interchange plus statement. This is a Heartland statement. Heartland statements are, you know, pretty clean and relatively easy to read once you know what you're looking for. Okay, so again, right here, you've got, total deposits, 244,000, and the total fees right there, right? So I didn't do the math. Do I have my cell phone here? So the effective rate, right here, we've got 4757.55 divided by 244,338.44. And so or it's 0.01947. So they're paying 1.9%, right? So sounds pretty good. Okay. But there definitely was room for us here. Okay. And again, this is a relatively high volume merchant that's $250,000 in a month. Right. So we know that their kind of effective rate there, they had the 1.9. Nice little chart here showing seasonality. Okay, so this is something else that's important, right? So you get a merchant statement. You want to have an idea of, is this a typical month? Is it a seasonal business, right? In this case, this particular business was a movie theater, right? And let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit more so you guys can see better. Okay, so this was a movie theater. Okay, so they obviously had a big summer every year, right? So you have your June, June, July, and August. Those were the big months, right? And then there was less volume in the other months. So again, when you're trying to evaluate the entire opportunity, you do have to factor in seasonality. All right, so we talked about pass-through, okay, and interchange. So again, right here, very simply put, I highlighted this. It's not normally highlighted, but you can see the Visa pass-through interchange and fees, right? So for the most part, when something is put into a statement and actually called pass-through, okay, that is, that's their way of saying this is what actually has to go back to Visa. Usually, these are not doctored and faked. Okay. Usually these are accurate numbers. Okay. So a lot of times with statements like this, you can, for the most part, disregard the true pass through because it's just what's having to get paid. Okay. So interchange rates and fees. It's got all sorts of different types of cards. You've got your business tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Okay. And a whole bunch of others in here. These are all different types of cards and transactions being processed. Okay. MasterCard pass-through and interchange. Again, we don't need to spend a lot of time in here because we're going to take their word for it that these are true pass-through and there's no markup happening here. It's nothing we can do anything about. Okay. Amex pass-through, Discover pass-through. Okay. And then down here, this is what you're looking for, especially when you ever see a Heartland statement. You've got the HPS processing fees. So Heartland, Heartland. Okay. Heartland. Okay. And again, sometimes it's going to be just announced right there on the front, and that's what the H, right, stands for. Okay. So if we take a look here, forgive all the scrolling, you can see this column is for discount rate. It's called discount, but it's markup. It's funny, right? Anyway, so you can see right here that you've got 0.35. Okay, so that's 0.35%. So in this case, this is an interchange plus account where we have the plus being 35 basis points, or 0.35%. Okay, and again, you can see the majority of transactions. Oops, having trouble moving this. Right, you see you've got a whole bunch of different transactions here. You also have this right here, this monthly versus daily discount cost. Okay, so because it's a month-end statement, they add another basis point on top of it. So the actual cost is 35 or 36 basis points here. Now, one thing that's a little bit different about this particular statement, they didn't actually have a per transaction fee, right? So over here in this column, you've got transaction fees. This is where you would probably have expected to see, 35 basis points plus 10 cents per transaction, right? So but we didn't have them here. So there actually weren't transaction fees with this particular merchant. Okay. What else are we looking for here? So we've got value added service, right? We're adding value, which is costing money, right? So customer intelligence suite, this is an additional monthly fee that was being paid by this merchant of $54.95. I believe with this one, there was also a PCI, and Chris is gonna be like, Ryan, you missed the PCI fee. I want to say there was a $125 PCI fee in here that I forgot to highlight. Right here. Yep, sorry. Monthly PCI non-compliance fee. Okay, for $125. Now, one thing about Host, um, is that we will handle the PCI compliance or we'll handle the PCI compliance for your merchants, right? So this is a fee. Whenever you see one of these PCI fees, this is something that when you're boarding with Host, you can tell them, you can tell your merchants that, you don't have to worry about PCI fees with Host because Host takes care of PCI compliance. Okay. So again, and that's, not an insignificant fee. It's $125. They're not all that big, but they were for this particular merchant, right? So we knew that on top of the actual cost of processing, we had 36 basis points on volume. We knew we had a $125 PCI non-compliance fee. And we also had a $55 customer intelligence suite. Okay, so again, between this, the 54 and the 125, that's almost $200 sitting around there. And again, even though their effective rate was relatively low, because the volume was so significant, there was still, $648 in markup, when it came to Visa, 187 for MasterCard, so this was, this was definitely, even though the effective rate was low, this was a deal worth fighting for that was going to be profitable. Right. I took up a lot of time with that, so now we're going to try to move a little bit faster. All right, so tiered is what we're going to get into next. Really fast about tiered. Again, I mentioned it before. You're usually looking at qualified, mid-qualified, and non-qualified. Okay, qualified is usually the rate that's going to be quoted to the merchants. Oh, this is what you're going to pay. Unspoken part is there's a non-qualified rate that's going to kick you in the teeth. There's a mid-qualified that's going to kick you in the teeth, and there's a non-qualified that's going to kick you in the you know what. Okay, so when we come in here to this statement, and again, you're not going to know until you start reading the statement to see what actually people are, what model is being followed, unless the merchant can actually tell you. All right, so again, we're going to scroll through a bunch of stuff. I want to mention one thing really fast. So on the first page, a lot of times, they'll have these important updates, and these will usually be something along the lines of, oh, hey, by the way, we're about to hit you with some extra costs. Okay. Some of them maybe you can't do anything about, but I've seen merchant statements in here where it says, oh, by the way, we're going to hit you with a $300, $400, $500, technology infrastructure fee, which is just, merchants not really the merchant is just getting whacked for $300 to $500. Okay. And so that's something to keep an eye on when you're taking a look in here. Visa will assess. This is stuff that we can't really do anything about, but it may be processor specific stuff that gets put in here. All right. So again, this statement, 34,000 in volume. A lot of times they'll itemize out the average ticket. Average ticket can be relevant because sometimes you've got merchants like maybe convenience stores where the ticket volume is very low, and that can impact things. Talk about that another time. Amounts funded by batching, and so you can see right here, this is basically was batched out every day, and at the end of the day, the merchant batches out the transactions, and they get funded, the next day probably, a certain amount. It's given a day by day breakdown of the batching. Now, Again, like I said, we want to go to the fees section. Okay, so again, we come in here, and when we're looking at fees, we see, oh, we see qual. I know what that is. Ryan talked about qualified, mid-qualified, non-qualified. Maybe this is probably tiered. Okay. And the thing I also want to remember is that tiered usually means somebody's getting kicked in the teeth. Okay. So, a couple of kind of sneaky things that I want to show you here. Okay. So, forget this one that I highlighted here, right? Because you can see we actually typed this in here. Let me zoom in. Okay. So, the qualified rate, and again, this is the rate that they're going to tell the merchant that you're going to pay. Oh, you're going to pay 2.08%, right? And then this 3.78 was not there. I had to calculate that. It was hidden. Why would it be hidden? Oh, I don't know, because maybe it's twice what the other rate is that we quoted them, right? So if you take a look down here under this MasterCard section, you've got your qualified rate, and then you've also got this non-qualified, but there's nothing written there. Okay. Again, why isn't it written there? Well, it's not written there because it's going to be a lot, right? So Chris and I were looking at this and we're like, okay, well, so what is the actual rate here? So, well, we took the 136.34 and we divided it by the 3606 and oh, wow, 3.78% for non-qualified. That's interesting. That's like twice what the rate of two was. Oh, what else is interesting? How much was actually qualified? $87 compared to $3,600, right? So this merchant probably thinking, oh, I've got 2%. And they're not at 2%. They're not even close to it, right? For the most part, they're almost double that. Okay. Now, you may also ask, okay, I see qualified and non-qualified. What about mid-qualified? Well, looks like there just weren't any mid-qualified transactions for MasterCard. Okay. If we come down here to Visa, we don't have anything in the we don't even have anything in the qualified bucket. That's funny. Okay. But then we have mid-qualified and non-qualified, right? So trying not to crack myself up. But again, this merchant was probably quoted a certain rate, but then for Visa, like nothing hit the qualified bucket. So we did the math. Mid-qualified, was about, was 2.78, and then the non-qualified remained at 3.78, right? And you can see almost all this volume is at a much higher rate. Okay, so when you see tiered, you know, that's a flashing red light that hey, you got to look at this one in more detail. Okay, another one that's interesting too here. So Visa kind of offline debit. Okay, you got a lot of abbreviations in here. Okay, so if it's qualified, if they do it right, it's going to be 1%. Okay, versus non-qualified. Oh, we're back up to 4 again. Okay, 3.78. Right. So these are the things you need to look for. All right. I'm going to have to move quickly through some of these others because we're just about out of time. This particular statement here, I mentioned that there was an example where there were 4 tiers. So this particular one did actually have, under interchange, they had a discount rate 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this kind of actually has 4 tiers. Interestingly enough, 3 of those tiers were all at the 1.99 and tier 4 was at 2.99, and actually a relatively small percentage of, the business was under that more expensive bucket. The majority of the transactions were in the higher buckets, right? So not as bad as the one we were looking at a second ago. All right. Couple other things. Want to talk about dual pricing here really fast and what a statement like this might look like. So again, in this case, you can see there's not a whole lot in this stadium or in this statement. Okay. We basically just got our deposits happening throughout the month. And then just very simple, there's a base rate of 3.846. Okay. So in this case, this merchant was at a dual pricing number of 3.99. Okay, so very profitable because of course not usually going to cost us that much to process the transactions, right? So this would be a profitable account. Okay, and again, the 3.846, why does it not say 3.999? It doesn't say 3.999 because the actual transaction, right? So if it was a $100 transaction and we got the 3.99 markup, then what actually wound up getting charged was $103.99 instead of 100, right? So you kind of have to reverse engineer. You have to work backward from the end amount that was collected to figure out what the actual discount was, or the actual um, dual pricing, uh, fee was for the given transactions, right? So when you multiply the end collected amount by the 3.846, what or 3.846, you're left with whatever that markup was, and that total discounts over here. Going to talk about a few others really fast. I know we're over time, but again, reach out to me and or your RM if you have more questions on some of this. I'll keep going here for a little bit. All right, so QuickBooks. One thing that most people know about QuickBooks is that it's flat rate processing. I'll actually show you in a second. It's not always flat rate processing, but it usually is. Okay, so again, right here from this QuickBooks statement, you've got, again, up here, you've got your day's batches, and how much actually went out. And then down here, you've got pretty simple fee structure, right? This merchant was sending out e-invoices that were being charged at the 2.99% flat rate for QuickBooks. And QuickBooks also tends to have a 1% rate for checks. Okay. So again, QuickBooks is fairly straightforward. Again, 2.99 usually is what you're looking at here. QuickBooks statements are very easy to read. Remember that if you do have a merchant that's been using QuickBooks payments, we have technology like Bill or Genie where they can integrate, where we can collect payments using other technology, but we can integrate into QuickBooks because they've been using QuickBooks payments because they like staying in QuickBooks. This right here is an example of a QuickBooks statement that is actually not flat rate. It's actually on interchange-plus. Okay, or actually it's kind of a hybrid, right? So if we take a look down here, we can see Amex is actually at a flat rate of 2.89. Okay, but then when we come down here, we can see all these different types of cards that we didn't see with the last statement. Okay, and so in these cases, we're looking at certain interchange rates. Okay, so you will from time to time see this. This can be negotiated, with QuickBooks, and we'll talk about Square and Stripe as well. Under certain conditions, you can actually negotiate around their flat rate processing. So sometimes you will see this. Just to be aware, it's not super common, but you will see it. All right, we also talked about Square and Stripe. Okay, so a lot of you are familiar with Square and Stripe, of course. Square, this is from Square's website. They advertise the 2.6% and 15 cents per transaction. Square and Stripe, however, are notorious for having really bad statements where they don't really disclose what's going on. Okay, but they get away with it. And so this is an example of a Square statement right here. And you're able to see in here that you've got, when you actually reverse engineer, that they actually were paying the 2.6% and 15 cents per transaction. Chris and I went and verified that. We took like this Visa amount down here. We multiplied 378 transactions times 15 cents. Okay. Because that's the per transaction amount. Okay. Subtracted that number from the 280 in fees that was owed, okay, to separate the percentage, the interchange plus, or to separate the interchange, okay. And so once we subtracted the per transaction amounts and then divided it by the volume, we got 2.6. Okay, so again, unfortunately, the Square and Stripe accounts, when you get a statement from them, if you can get a statement from them, it's not going to have the breakdown that the other statements do. It's kind of annoying. It can be especially annoying when you're dealing with a merchant, you're not quite sure what types of cards they're using. Maybe you're looking for optimization opportunities. We've talked about interchange optimization. Can't really check the type of cards. You kind of have to give a best guess. But anyway, this is what a square statement's going to look like. We also mentioned Stripe. This is on Stripe's website. You know, they have their standard 2.9 and 30 cents per transaction. There's some other cases where it can be, you know, 2.6 and 30 cents per transaction. Whoops. And in this case, this was a statement from Stripe that we got. And in here, we were able to go and we were actually able to see that this particular merchant, we thought they would probably be priced at 2.9, but they were actually priced at 2.6 cents per transaction. How did we figure that out? Okay, we figured that out again by we had 1,500 transactions. So we took 1,514 times 30 cents. Okay. Subtracted that from the total fees of 39.25.31. Okay, so 39.25.31 minus, you know, 1,514 times 30 cents. That gave us the total percentage because we had gotten the per transaction amount out and divided that, you know, by the total volume, and that came out to 2.6%. All right, so they did 2.6% at 30 cents per transaction. Just again, of note, this is an example of kind of conditional pricing. It wasn't their normal pricing. You know, Stripe's normal card transactions are 2.9% and 30 cents per transaction, but this merchant, probably based upon volume, they were able to negotiate kind of their own rate. One more that I want to share. It's a little bit of an outlier. This one's called ERR. This is another one, enhanced rate recovery. Okay, this is another one. I'd say it's kind of similar to what happens with tiered. And I want to just give you guys a quick snapshot on what this can look like. All right, so we got our global payment statement here. We're going ahead and looking down again. First section, deposits. You know, you can see kind of what they're batching out on a daily basis. That's fine. Okay. Settlement charges, settlement discount. All right. And then once we get down here, we start under the percentage rate section right here. We see all these 2.38s, 2.38, 2.38, and 15 cents per transaction. So you got your discount rate you're looking for. You're looking for your item rate. Okay, the item rate's the per transaction. The discount rate is the percentage they're paying. Okay, so again, we've got a bunch of different types of cards here, all listed at 2.38%. So it kind of looks like flat rate, 2.38% and 15 cents per transaction. Okay, but we keep reading. Okay, and then we come down here and we see surcharges and debit network fees. And we see, oh, wow, okay. We see, what's this? Right? We see there were $145,000 in volume that wound up resulting in $2,900 in addition to this 2.3 that was up here, right? So when we're looking at Visa Signature Preferred, we saw 146,000 at 2.38, so they paid this $3,500. Doesn't look exactly the same, but it's pretty much representing the same thing. We see down here again, under surcharges, we see, oh, there's that 145 again. A little bit different. It was 146 above, but same kind of bucket here. And that's another $2,909. Okay, so this is an enhanced rate recovery situation. Okay, so when interchange, basically the way it works is when interchange exceeds that 2.38 flat rate, or that 2.38 flat rate number, okay, almost like an additional fee kind of kicks in, right? It's like, okay, well, what's that fee? Oh, well, that was just another 2%, right? Oh, so we just went ahead and doubled the rate, you know, for these transactions, right? They thought they were at 2.38. It was actually 4.38 for all the transactions. One thing Chris pointed out too when we were taking a look at it was this 2.38 was probably very strategically placed Okay. Because um, there's a lot of when we go to the interchange table, there's a lot of interchange rates at 2.4. Okay, so well, why did they put it at 2.38? Why did they go just below it? Well, they went just below it so that all those 2.4% transactions would hit and trigger, yay, another 2%, right? So they can say, oh, we're charging you 2.38, but they don't realize that a lot of their transactions are actually going to hit at 2.4, which is going to cost them the 2.38 plus an additional 2 on top of it. Okay, so very expensive. So there were an additional on top of the 2.38 that was being paid. This merchant wound up paying an additional $6,700 on top of probably what they kind of thought they should have been paying. All right. So, also, again, in the fee section, you got your PCI non-compliance fees because, right, we didn't hit them hard enough yet, right? We already doubled up their interchange. But let's go ahead and hit them with PCI non-compliance. Let's go ahead and hit them with our tech suite as well. So, another, what is that, $115 on top of it. So, but what's another $115 when we're already hitting them for 20,000, I guess, is we're thinking. Anyway, so interesting stuff to look at. We can take deeper dives on this, of course. You can reach out to your relationship managers. We'll be happy to go through any of this. Again, we have a pricing and proposal tool where if you give us a merchant statement, we're actually able to create a nice looking proposal that you can take to your merchants to win the business. I've done that. We've done that for many of you. Happy to continue to do it. But again, ideally, you're able to do this, or at least a lot of this on the fly, at least point some things out on the fly. Hey, you're getting walloped here. I'll put together, this is, see this, you see this, you see this. This is where you're really getting killed. I'll put together the hard numbers as to what I can do for you. But just so you know, you thought you were paying 2.38. It's not even remotely close to that. Okay. And they're going to be like, I knew something was wrong. It seemed really high, but I was just really busy. Right. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up there. I've already taken plenty of your time here today, but appreciate you looking. So again, usually you're going to want to get 3 months of statements. Be aware of seasonality too. When you're getting statements, you definitely want to make sure you're at least getting some of the busier seasons. Maybe you can get a couple of statements from in season, one from out of season. Okay. Um, Also, on top of this, we've talked about the additional things that you can bring in terms of value to your merchants to help them save money. The Cloud Manager Suite, we keep talking about it, and a lot of you guys are continuing to reach out to me and take advantage of it. Okay, so a lot of these businesses are paying for software to run their business as well. We're giving that to them too, right? So you're going to beat them. You're going to beat the rates of the past processors. You're going to also give them software that's going to help them avoid a monthly software hit. So continue reaching out to me about that. We'll get more demos scheduled. I'm gonna stop share now. Let's see if we have any unanswered questions. No, we don't have any unanswered questions. All right. So guys, thanks so much for joining us today. This is kind of a mini series within the trenches. So this is kind of part one. So this week is on reading the merchant statement. Next week is going to be on pricing. Okay. So want to encourage you guys that came today to join us next week. We'll talk more about pricing once we're able to read the merchant statement. So hope you guys found this helpful. Reach out, give me your feedback, and I'll talk to you soon.